Hi, and welcome. My name is Mio Stevens Gandara, Assistant Professor of Photography and current organizer for cultural events at Rio Hondo College. The Cultural Events program at Rio Hondo College presents a diverse selection of arts and entertainment free of charge for our community. Rio Hondo's Cultural Events program showcases the visual and performing arts work of students and faculty, as well as regional, national, and international artists. For the 2020-2021 school year, Rio Hondo will be showcasing these events online. This year, we will be featuring events with a focus on three categories: honoring ancestors, preserving culture for future generations, and youth and community empowerment. This is only our second experience streaming our cultural events live during this pandemic. So if we should face any technical difficulties, please be patient, we will work it out. If you have questions, please post them and we will answer at the end of the workshop. We are pleased to present Alma Guzman and Amy Honjo. Alma Guzman is the Sustainable Little Tokyo Program Coordinator at the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center. As a cultural worker, Alma is committed to providing support to artists, arts organizations, and residents through public programming opportunities that are rooted in community building and healing. In her free time, she enjoys visiting bookstores and libraries, watching competitive cooking shows, and attending summer festivals in Los Angeles. Amy Honjo is the Cycle of Food Coordinator at the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center. Amy Honjo was born in East LA, California, transplanted to the suburbs and foothills, and rerouted in Monterey Park. Her day jobs consisted of pushing pencils and tapping keyboards. She homeschooled a kodomo, or niño, and learned the best lessons start from the heart. She is now retired and recycled as a Bokashi Composting garbage collector in Little Tokyo. Welcome, Amy and Alma.
My turn. So thank you, Rio Hondo, for inviting us to be part of your cultural events for 2020-21. And given the challenges of 2020, I'd like to thank all the participants for joining us, given all the challenges that we are facing this year, to also, I hope, have a moment of rest and entertainment, as well as really doing efforts toward a very urgent problem for our Earth. So on that note, I would like to first start with showing you the outline of today. So let's go to the outline. Here we go, outline. So you can see that I'd like to start with a big picture, because this always helps me to keep in mind of what my daily task is to be, because I understand and appreciate why I'm making these efforts. And then we'll go into how to make and how to do bokashi. I'd like to start first with recognizing the sponsors of our Heroes Bokashi Club, and that is Sustainable Little Tokyo, and Alma will say a few words.
Hi, everyone. So Sustainable Little Tokyo, otherwise known as SLT, is a community-driven initiative working to ensure a healthy, equitable, and culturally rich Little Tokyo for generations to come. SLT is a campaign led by the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center, the Little Tokyo Community Council, and the Little Tokyo Service Center. And this campaign is committed to bringing this community-wide vision to life while continuing to honor the neighborhood's deep history as a center for Japanese American communities and culture. So if you'd like to learn more about our initiative, you can visit us at sustainablelittlетokyo.org. Or after watching this workshop, please feel free to join our Bokashi group on Facebook. And we are on social media on Instagram. And our handle is Sustainable Little Tokyo. So I'll hand it back to Amy to walk us through Bokashi Composting.
Thank you, Alma. And now I'd like to go to the next slide, because one of the big pictures that I think is important for all of us to understand, and I've titled it See the Big Picture, because I'm talking about carbon, one of our basic elements that is key in all organic living beings on our planet. And C, or carbon, is very important for the soil because it really is the key ingredient to make our soil fertile and to create air pockets and to make it absorb water. And also it helps to detoxify our soil. So C is very important, and I'm talking about it because really throughout history, people have been depleting the carbon in our soils. And you can see in the next slide that we can see that there are three categories of why the sea is being depleted from our planet. The two on the right are natural procedures that are done that emit CO2 or C into the air. And this is in addition to what people do in terms of other CO2 emissions, including our fossil fuels, as well as how we till our soils. And you can see on the size of the arrows that really the natural processes contribute more C or CO2 to the air than even people do. But in the next slide, you'll see that in the natural cycles, they also have ways in which to replenish the earth with the sea because they photosynthesize. So they are able to take the CO2 and use they give the O2 to us to breathe, and then the C then is used in the growth of the organism or the plant, and then it also then goes into support of the earth or the soil. So if you could take a look at the red circle area there, this is what we do, and we don't have any way, we don't photosynthesize to return the C back to the earth. So one way to do that would be what we're here today, is to return our organic waste back into the earth. Also, what I want to point out in this picture is that we do take a lot of measures in trying to reduce how much CO2 we emit into the air, which is good. We're reducing that. But for the amount that is put into the air, we still don't have mechanisms to return the CO2 back to the earth, or the C back to the earth. So it's a good thing to keep in mind our efforts to not photosynthesize, but to return the C back to the earth. Okay, and the next slide, the other concept that I'd like to have as an overview is one that is really the basis for our sustainable little Tokyo, and it's this word, Mottainai. And in simplistic form, you could translate it as being the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle. And this certainly applies to what we're going to be presenting today, because it's important not only to have big piles of things that you want to recycle, but first to consider reduce. So maybe you don't need to buy so much. You don't need to supersize or buy 2 for 1. And for the things that you do buy, make sure that you use it or share it, or in some cases support rescuing of food that would spoil, and share it then with those who are in need of food. So that is the basic concept of Mottainai, but this word is really a lot bigger than the 3 R's. There's a 4th R that you'll see in the next slide, which is the R of respect. And this concept then says, remember the 3 R's, but also respect yourself, respect others, and respect the earth. And not only respect, but to acknowledge and to realize that we are all interconnected. This is a good message for all of us all, especially in this year, how interconnected we are and the responsibility that we have to each other. In this next slide here, I'm showing, maybe you know about Wangari Maathai. She's the first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and she's an environmental activist. And the people in Japan were so impressed with her programs in Africa that they invited her to speak. When she came to Japan, what impressed her most was this word Mottainai. And she thought the whole world can really use this concept of being interconnected as well as representing the 3 R's. So if you go to her website, which is the Green Belt Movement of Africa, one of her principal concepts is Mottainai. And it's a concept I think that we can apply to all parts of our life. And I think that all cultures may have this idiom or this kind of word. And before we go on, I would like to invite anyone who can put into the chat box words in English or in their own languages, because I'd like to broaden this concept of how we are all interconnected, and that through many of our traditions and customs, we all have this belief that I would like to interconnect. So based on these two concepts then of sea and Mottainai, let's focus in a little bit more about our food cycle on the next slide. So I think why you're all here today is because we realize that our food cycle or recycling is broken. And I do like this image here because it applies both to inorganic as well as organic waste that we just buy, use, put in a trash can, and it goes in this one-way path to the landfill. And if you've been reading the newspapers, we try to ship our waste to other countries, and they have caught on that they don't want our waste either. And so we are faced with really being responsible and accounting for ourselves. And on the next slide, it even focuses in more about our food cycle here. So if you can start in the lower left corner, you can see that here's all of our produce, food being grown on farms, being transported to our markets, farmers markets, and then we as consumers buy, use, eat, maybe forget some things in our refrigerator, and also have food scraps that we've put into the trash, put into a trash can, put out to our curb, and then along comes the trash hauler. And for us, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So, but as we know, it just goes to the landfill. So today I'd like to talk about Bokashi, and on the next slide, you can see how it can help to make this food cycle a real cycle. So what we'll share today is that your food scraps then will go into a bucket or some kind of container, and you'll sprinkle in Bokashi, which I'll talk more about today, and you'll cover it, and soon you'll bury it, and it'll go back, add the sea or the carbon to the earth, and we'll be doing our part to being a natural cycle. Okay, so on the next slide, this is again, we're talking about our organization, and I'm going to be calling this Bokashi Composting. And there's 3 things that I'd like you to keep in mind before we talk about the actual Bokashi. So number 1, next slide, remember that whatever you do, we don't want anything to go to the landfill. So whatever you can do, buy less, use it up, bury it in the ground, but we don't want it to go to the landfill. That's number 1. Okay, so number 2 is what I talked about earlier about sea and carbon and how important it is for our soil. So for you gardeners, you'll see significant changes in your soft, fertile soil by adding Bokashi to your dirt and enriching it. And then number 3, next slide, is, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember, but I grew up in Los Angeles, and we used to have a garbage day or garbage truck that would come. So we collected our garbage with a little strainer in our kitchen sinks, and we would put it out into this garbage bin, and we had a garbage man come once a week to pick up our garbage. But since that time, we went away with that. Some of us had garbage disposals, which really isn't a good idea either. But we need to change our habit and separate out again organic waste. And because you're all here today means you have some inclination or understanding that that's an important thing to do. But if you forget, or if it seems too challenging, don't be discouraged and don't write it off. Just each educational step is a step in the right direction, and don't be too hard on yourself, and try again. Okay, so those are the 3 points, and let's talk about Bokashi. Okay, so what is Bokashi? It's very simple. It's a way of recycling of your food waste. And maybe some of you know about the traditional composting where you make it and mix it with the browns and the carbons, and you make a big heap or you make a furrow. And it's what you call an aerobic process. So the big difference between traditional composting and Bokashi composting is that this is an anaerobic process with no air, and it includes recycling of meat and dairy, eggshells, coffee grounds, everything. Okay, so in the next slide here, again, it's an anaerobic process, so that means no air. It's fermenting. For those of you that may pickle, think about pickling a cucumber. That's what you're going to do with your food. So it's an airtight situation. It's not rotting. It's just going to pickle it. Therefore, there's no emitting of CO4 or methane gas. And because there's no rotting, if you do it right, there's no foul smell. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to start here with showing how to make Bokashi. That would be how it would be done if you came to our workshop, which we're only doing now through Zoom or through StreamYard. But I'd like to show you the process because I'll also be talking about the importance and the ingredients of what makes Bokashi unique. Okay? Hope you enjoy. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to make Bokashi. It's really very easy to make. I have to admit though, if you were to make it in a large quantity, it would be a lot cheaper. But for today, we'll start with a small recipe, and you can decide if you like to do it and would like to make it in a larger quantity. But today I'm going to make a recipe for 4 pounds of Bokashi wheat bran. Okay, so it's very easy. We're just going to start with 3 liquids, the active ingredient, molasses, and water. Mix them together and then stick them with the wheat bran. Okay, so 3 cups of water. This is the active ingredient. There's 3 categories of microorganisms in this. It's called ProBio. You can buy it online. The first category of microorganisms deter rotting and encourages fermenting, which is what we want in this process of Bokashi composting. So I'm going to add 1.5 tablespoons. The other 2 categories of microorganisms, one enriches your soil, promotes enrichment of your soil, and the other promotes plant growth. So 1.5 tablespoons of that, and then a little bit of food for the microorganisms. So we're going to add, again, 1.5 tablespoons, this time, of organic molasses. 1.5. Yep. This isn't a tablespoon. It's called a 15 Japanese spoon, but I learned that this equates to about 1 tablespoon. So 1.5 tablespoons of your active ingredient. It's oftenly called EM1, and 1.5 tablespoons of organic molasses. Stirring. Okay, so I call what we're making today Bokashi bran because we're using wheat bran as our carbon substrate. In other parts of, actually in California, they may use rice bran. And if you go online, you'll see that people use newspaper and really any other type of carbon substrate. I found the ease and convenience of using the wheat bran, which is in Southern California a pretty reasonable product to buy. Okay, so for this recipe, it's for 4 pounds of wheat bran, but for my convenience, I like to mix in units of 2 pounds. So hopefully you have a scale at your home. If not, if you happen to have a KFC 8-piece chicken bucket and you fill it to the inner brim here, that's 2 pounds worth. But as you can see, it's really kind of gone down in level because just like a cereal box, it just kind of settles down. But this is 2 pounds of wheat bran. And then I'm going to add only, since this is only 2 pounds, I'm going to add half of our mixture, or 1.5 cups. That to the dry bran. Okay. For those that do baking, then you'll understand that sometimes, well, you put liquid into your flour and the liquid just seems to disappear. But the more that you mix it or knead it, then you realize the whole texture changes from just a dry, powdery substance to more of a crumbly substance. And that's kind of what I want to do here, is to mix in this liquid to the wheat bran. I wouldn't go quickly at this process. It's key that the liquid totally mixes in with the wheat bran. For those of you that don't like to get your hands dirty, maybe someone else should do this step. Or you can buy a finished Bokashi brand product online. A lot more expensive though. And for the rest of us that like to make mud pies and like to make bread, this is kind of a fun process. When I do this workshop live and in person, not too long ago, people would say, it smells like making bread because the liquid makes the smell of the wheat bran lift, and it smells like you're making bread. For those that weren't familiar with making bread, someone thought it smelled like cucumbers. I don't know how that happened. But a lot agreed that they thought it smelled like shoyu. But I'll let you decide yourself if you decide to make your own Bokashi brand. Okay, so this is getting more to the consistency that looks mixed. It's crumbly. It's a little darker in color and not so powdery as it was before I added the liquid. As you can kind of see, it smells like bread. Okay. One of the tests that I was taught is that if you grab a handful of it and squeeze it, and if it clumps, then it's ready. Okay, so the next step is that we want the microorganisms from this to inoculate or embed into the wheat bran. So we want to stick it into a plastic bag because these microorganisms grow in an anaerobic or a no air environment. I don't know if you can see from the video, but I kind of made a mess. So another note, if you're going to make this, I use this bowl for demonstration purposes, but you might want to use a container that isn't so wide mouthed, because now to transfer all of this into a bag about this size, is kind of a fancy trick. So instead, this has been mixed and you'll want to transfer it to a bag like this. Okay. Now the key thing before you close this bag is that you want to get all the air out. So I push down the corners first, get all the air out of the pocket corners, both sides like this. And then I push down the side and the other side. It is kind of fun to make it in a group because everybody has different styles of how they pack this in. But the key thing is to get the air out. So, okay, so now I have the corners packed and the sides packed. And then I'm just going to press down, take all the air out. It's starting to remind me of a shape that I couldn't remember, so my daughter and I looked it up online. It's called a bolillo, kind of a Mexican bread that looks this shape, maybe a little bit smaller, but kind of a football shape maybe. Okay, so now I have those, I think I have a lot of the air out, and then I'm just going to spin it, fold it over. I have a rubber band handy. I'm just going to tie it up like this. Okay, so for 2 weeks, I'm going to put this either in a dark plastic bag in an out of way, quiet place, or you can put it in a cupboard, a dark spot, maybe at room temperature, not too hot, not too cold. And you're just going to let it rest, and the microorganisms then will embed into the wheat bran. So after 2 weeks, it should begin to have white spots in it. You see this white spot here? This is an okay white mold that is indicating that the microorganisms from this have embedded into your wheat bran. Okay, so when that happens, that's a good sign. Don't let it turn black because it means you waited too long. Okay, so when it's white, then you want to open the bag and dry it totally out. As long as it's in this anaerobic wet situation, it'll continue to grow, and you don't want it to overgrow and have other microorganisms begin to compete with what you want to have in your wheat bran. So you just get like a paper bag and you just empty this contents into the bag. I might put it out in my front yard, fluff it up maybe for a day. Today it's pretty warm, maybe a day and a half, and then I'll feel it. And as long as it's dry, then the microorganisms will become inactive and stable until I sprinkle it onto my food waste. In my kitchen, this is how I store it, just like this. It's dry, don't grow anymore till I take some out and sprinkle it onto my food waste. So here, it's ready to go. In summary of what I just showed you, first step is to mix all the ingredients together, put it into a plastic bag, take all the air out that you can, wait 2 weeks, open it up, stick it in stick it in a bag, dry it out, and stick it in a container, and it's ready to use. You're ready to go in your waste food recycling efforts. Okay, the next question is, how do you use it? Okay, so before we go into how do we use it, I have given Mio the recipe for what you just saw, home style version, so it's in smaller quantities. So I'm sure you can request it, or she may share that directly with all of you as well, the recipe. But I do want to make a special announcement here that we can move into the slide here. You can make your own. Our club also sells bokashi, so that is another option. But for those of you special people listening today, you'll have to hear what Mio has to say, because she has a special one-time offer for you at the end of this workshop. Okay. Also, there's on the next slide, if you can't wait, and I do suggest that you go online and just look up bokashi in general, but you can also buy your bokashi online. You'll see a lot of different prices. Most of them will be 2 to 3 times more than what our club offers, but not as good as the special deal that Neil has for you later. So, but these are options for you to get started using bokashi. So then we come to the next slide, which is talking about, well, how do we use bokashi? And the one note that I want to make here before we get into how you use it is that I think it's a good idea that you approach how to use it as a home experience or experiment. I know a number of families who it's a family experiment of collecting your food waste and what does it look like when you've collected it and when you've added bokashi, and it's turned into a fun science experiment. So don't be hard on yourselves and just observe and take each day at a time. And like, we have Facebook for questions, or if I'm available, I'll answer your questions as well. But just kind of look at it as a fun experiment. Okay, ready? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how do you use bokashi. And before I start, I just want to give you a little bit of perspective. Bokashi wheat bran is made with this active ingredient, probio or EM1. And really there are many uses, very useful uses of this product. A very common one, though, is to mix this in and dilute it down and to inoculate it into wheat bran. And that's the demonstration that I'm going to do today. So in my kitchen, I have this Bokashi wheat bran that's been dry, and I can just have it in a container. And I have a food waste collection bucket. It's a bucket with a screw top lid, and it's really 2 buckets. The top bucket, you can see, has holes in it, so it becomes like a drain. In the bottom bucket, no holes. So I keep this in my kitchen like this, and then depending if I'm cooking a lot or cooking a little, if I'm cooking a lot, I'll put maybe a pie pan on my kitchen counter, and then as I'm chopping and there's scraps there or whatever, I'll load it into the pie pan, and then at the end of whatever I'm making, meal I'm making, then I will open the lid and put whatever scraps that I have into the bucket. I wait because really how this system works is in an anaerobic situation, no air. So the less times that I have to open my bucket lid in a day, the better. So let's pretend instead of having a pie tin of my scraps, sample of what I might have had that I collected for a while. So you could see what I can collect and what I can throw in here. For starters are all your greens, all your cuttings, potato peels, carrot peels, whatever. And here's my fruit, any of the fruit seeds, fruit stems, and then something which maybe your other composting methods did not have. You can put meat And here I have meat bones. If you're going to have meat bones, these are my favorite meat bones to have. They're Colby meat bones, only because they've already been chopped and broken down. But that's the second point that I want to make, is that the smaller chopped the pieces are, then the more this bokashi mixture can attach itself to the surface and help to ferment, not rot, and to begin to get it ready for breaking down in your soil. So I collect these, stick them in my bucket, and for maybe about an inch or layer of food, then I just go in here, get a handful, and sprinkle it in my bucket and put the lid back on. So maybe one day I clean out my refrigerator and found a lot of things that I forgot about. So also what can go into your bucket are prepared leftover food, your doggy bag food that you forgot to eat or didn't want to eat anymore. So your leftover McDonald's hamburger, whatever, all that can go into here. Just every time, add in more bokashi, add in more of this. The only thing you shouldn't put in there is like really moldy food, because the mold then will offset the balance of what these microorganisms in this are trying to do. So no heavily molded objects. But other than that, it can all go into your bucket and just continually sprinkle in some bokashi. As I was advised, if it has a rotting smell, add more bokashi. Okay. And one point, okay, so always put the lid back on like this. When I started doing this process, one of the first things I fully realized was how much waste I created, how much I forgot of things in the refrigerator, and how many things I thought I liked the fruit, but maybe it wasn't as sweet as I thought, but I left it in the refrigerator. So it reminds me about careful shopping, and then a little bit more vigilant about eating or sharing. So anyway, I'm sure you have a lot of lessons to learn when you start to put your food waste into your bucket. Okay, so you're going to make this lasagna method of food waste bokashi, food waste bokashi. And every time that you add to it, look and see what's happening in your bucket. If there seems to be starting to have a lot of white, moldy look in there, I would then stop, tighten the lid, and set it aside for 2 weeks. And then it'll be ready to bury in the ground. If you fill your bucket up very quickly, again, tighten the lid down, set it aside for 2 weeks, and then take the lid off, dig a hole, and bury it. The one other key point is do you recall that this is a double bucket set, and the top bucket has holes in it. So if you're cooking a lot with greens, a lot of napa, a lot of cabbage, and you create liquid, the liquid will start to collect in the bottom. The liquid will start to smell. So I would check this every few days, and if you start to see liquid collecting, this is what I would do. I would empty it down any one of the drains in your home, because the active microorganisms that are in this liquid will then begin to, in a non-toxic way, eat away all the gunk, all the clogs in your drain. So it's a natural drain cleaner. So that's very good. If your drains are clear and running, if you want to dilute it 1 to 100 parts of water, then you can also use it as fertilizer in your garden. So just, even if you forget and throw it down your drain, it's a good idea. Okay. So good luck and happy Bokashi-ing. Okay, happy Bokashi to you. What else I wanted to point out to you is that if you don't have this double bucket system, you can try, well, you can make it. You can see I just made that from 2 buckets from Home Depot and just drilled some holes in it. They do have lids there as well. They're the peel on, peel off type, which will do. If you're interested in having a tighter, easy screw top lid, you can contact me, or I do buy them in bulk from Uline. So they have a very good screw top lid for 2-gallon buckets. If you just want to try to experiment with what you have with the bokashi that you might receive today, you can try doing a double plastic bag with holes in the top one, because the important thing is to separate or have drainage from your food waste. So go ahead and try to experiment with that as well. And as I mentioned about the liquid might be the biggest challenge in this bokashi process, because it will begin to smell a little rotten. So here I'm stating to make sure that you empty it before you bury your pickled food waste, but also I mentioned that you can check it every few days, and just empty it down your drain is a good idea. And then in the last slide here is just in summary in the next slide about what to do after your bucket has rested for 2 weeks. There's been a little confusion in the past about what this process is, but basically you want to empty the top bucket into the hole that you've dug, mix the dirt in with the fermented food waste, and then cover it. Some of you may have a critter problem in your neighborhood, or you have a very eager dog that likes to dig holes. People who've had those situations, they'll dig a hole, bury it, they'll put a piece of ceramic tile, they'll put their trash can on top of that spot, because within 2 weeks, it will have dissipated and you'll be ready to dig a hole and move your trash can or your tile to the new spot. So that's probably one of the more common challenges of when you have critters or your own pet who likes to dig. And then after 4 weeks, I've been curious and I'll dig. And in most times, you can't even see or recognize the food that you buried. It'll be that quick of a turnaround once you've fermented your food. It's like magic. Okay, so in closing, the big picture, I didn't put it here, but really the big picture is the sea and the importance of returning it to the earth. But it's the Mottainai 3 R's. Only buy what you need, use or share whatever you buy or receive, and then recycle that which you cannot use. And bokashi is easy. You just collect your food waste, sprinkle bokashi, make it rest for 2 weeks, and bury it. It's that easy. So good luck to you. And we're now going to move on to questions that you may have. And there'll be the 3 of us to either pose or answer your questions. Thank you.
Yes, we have lots of questions. Melissa Ponce, I think I know her. She says, how long does it take for the bokashi to work? That's her question.
Well, I think you mean the time after I sprinkled it into my bucket. So when either your bucket is full, you're going to let it rest for 2 weeks, or when I said even if you aren't a quick filler of your bucket, if you start to see white on it, you're going to put the lid on and you're going to let it rest, or really this is the time that the bokashi will embed into your food waste. So to answer your question, Melissa, in the short run, 2 weeks is it. Then you're going to take the lid off and bury it, put it into the ground, and within 2 weeks after you've buried it, you can plant on top. And then, as I just mentioned, after 4 weeks, it'll be gone. It'll be part of the soil.
We have another question from Ruhina. She wants to know, where can we buy wheat or rice bran?
Good question. Well, for those of you that used to buy from like Sprouts or Whole Foods that had bins, you could buy wheat bran there, but of course now during our pandemic, there's no more bins. But that process also is very expensive because that's for eating. I go to a animal feed store.
Mm.
There's one, I'm here in Monterey Park. There's one near Griffith Park because there's horses around that area. The feed store will sell sometimes 20 or 30-pound bags of wheat bran, very reasonably priced, very effective in making bokashi. That's another reason why it's fun to make it in bulk or with a group, because the economies of scale, it's cheap and readily available. So I would try. There's a few feed stores throughout LA area. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay, great. Susan has a question. She says, in my big compost bin, I put garden waste like dried plant material and grass clippings. Should I do that separately from the food waste I bokashi ferment?
Well, you can easily mix the two if you'd like, but just the logistics in my mind of the 2-gallon bucket. I happen to have one here in my kitchen. This easily holds for my kitchen waste over 2 weeks. So in my garden, I create a lot more garden waste. So I bokashi my food waste, and if you'd like, once you have let it rest for 2 weeks, then you can add it to your compost. It will enhance your compost ingredients by adding the bokashi to it. But the magic or the beauty of the bokashi is that after 2 weeks of resting, it's ready to be put into the ground and incorporated into your soil. And within 2 weeks after that, it's done. It's ready. Where the typical traditional composting, I would guess your process maybe takes at least 3 to 4 months, depending on the weather, of turning and turning before it becomes soil. So you can do it faster, or you could mix it if you'd like.
Okay. We have a question from Matt, who is one of our faculty members. He says, I might have missed this, but can you continue to add food waste to the white bucket during the 2-week period?
You can, but the reason why you're letting that amount rest for 2 weeks is because then it makes the bokashi inoculate into all the food that you have. So if you continue to add more food, then you're just delaying the time that you can go ahead and bury that. So for those of us that are serious bokashi users, we usually have 2 bucket sets. So we fill one, let it rest, and the second bucket we're filling. I can have 2 weeks to fill this one, and the one that's been resting for 2 weeks, then I can rotate it out, empty it, and then rotate it back in. So to have 2 sets is really the practical way to use it. But in the beginning, if you're just experimenting and wanting to see if collecting food waste is your thing, I don't talk about getting 2 sets or 2 bucket sets, but that's how most of us operate.
Okay. Ruhina says, what happens if the top of the bucket is turning white and we continue to add food waste to it? Why do we stop early?
Well, the white on top is telling you that for the food that you have in there, it's already been inoculated with the microorganisms. So if you continue that process for too long, then that's where you kind of worry that other food that you're putting in, maybe something that has something for the potential of molding, then you're going to eventually offset the balance of the positive or good microorganisms of bokashi. So once you start to see white, you don't want to delay too long adding in food before you put it into the ground. That's the reason. That's why I call it an experiment. Because, it can vary. Like during the summer, it's warmer, it's more conducive for everything to grow. So you might want to watch it a little more closely. In the winter, if your house is very cold, then maybe you won't even see white after 2 weeks. So you just want to see what you're growing in your kitchen bucket.
Okay. Elaine says, should we be concerned about not breathing in white spots when opening the bokashi bag?
I don't find the white to be very airborne. It seems to be pretty stayed in the bucket. So I don't find it a problem of what you're breathing in. And as long as it's white, you're still talking about bokashi. And I have to tell you this one story. Okay, the man who I learned how to do this process for was a disciple or student of the man who created EM1 or bokashi in Okinawa. So when I first started this process, I was working with, one of my test sites was a preschool program. So I was very worried about it being harmful to the preschool children who might want to experiment and try everything. So he just opened this and took a drink, because the whole process is very healthy and very natural, but I just wouldn't test the system in terms of leaving the white in the bucket for too long.
And someone had a question about where to buy the ProBio.
I'm not if you're a fan of Amazon, but if you just enter in Bokashi or probiotic onto Amazon, you'll see several choices. This product here says SCD. This is one of there are a number of products that will say that they will help in this kind of fermenting process. The key thing, some of them will not have all the three categories of microorganisms. This is one product that was recommended to me from Hiro, which is our name of our club, because he is the man we learned from, Hiro Takeuchi. So this is one of the products that he could guarantee had the three categories of microorganisms that balance out and do more than just, some will just deter rotting, which is good, but it's really the balance of the two other categories then that help plant growth and help enrich the soil. So look for that.
Amy, what if you search for microbial liquid or microbial inoculant? Would you be able to find it as well if you Google search those words?
You could, but I would again look probably for this brand name, SCD, because if you're really a chemist and wanted to study this, you can check and see what balance of microorganisms are put into the mix. A lot of them will not state what they are, but they will say lactic acid bacteria, and that's the category then that deters the rotting, but does not have anything to do with enhancing of the plant growth or of enriching the soil. So that's a key thing to look for.
Great. And we're going to post the recipe to our Facebook page, and we're also going to post links to the ingredients so you can find the ProBio. So I want to thank you, and remember, Sustainable Little Tokyo, if you want to look up what projects that Alma's working on and Amy is working on, and also the Heroes Bokashi Club. So great. And then I wanted to thank you for coming. I think this is the first workshop of this kind that we've done at Rio. We usually we have dance performances and things like that. And so it's really nice for, so many people are gardening right now, and it's good to kind of always be thinking about kind of repurposing what we use and putting it back, and into the environment to to grow more things. And so being able to kind of work on this, everybody's working at home, everybody's gardening. So I think this is a very timely event. So thank you so much. I really
for inviting us. Thank you.
Both of you for coming. And Rio Hondo appreciates you.
Yeah.
I want to make some announcements for everybody who's listening out there. Thank you all. And as Amy mentioned, we have a special surprise for you. So the first announcement I have is, as part of our Bokashi workshop, Rio Hondo College is giving out 40 bags of free Bokashi. Woo! And this is all prepared by Amy. And it's beautifully wrapped in Japanese style, perfectly wrapped
Recycled.
in recycled rafu shimpo, which is Japanese newspaper, rafu shimpo, and she tied it with a cute little string, and then there's some directions on how to use it, and so we are going to give that out, people, Thursday, September 17th, from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at Rio Hondo, and it's curbside pickup only at the Student Services Center on Circle Drive. Please remain in your car. Please wear a mask, and we will give out the Bokashi. So it's kind of first come, first serve. If you guys are interested, please come and get your Bokashi on Thursday. And thank you, Amy, for preparing all of it, because it's super cute and super nice how you do that. Okay, so the other announcement I have is our next event. So on from October 6th through 8th, we have esteemed altarista Ofelia Esparza and her daughter Rosana Esparza Aarons, and they are going to come to our campus. Ofelia is a national treasure. She is known for making beautiful ofrendas or altars for Dia de los Muertos, and she is going to build one on our campus. She has visited our campus before, but it's been a couple of years, so she's going to build one on campus, and we are going to film the production of the altar, and we are going to stream that on our video channels. So you will be able to see that. Now, on the 8th at 7:30 p.m., Ofelia will be doing a talk live, and so viewers can ask her questions just like you're doing now and she will answer them, and she's going to talk about her process and the idea of Dia de los Muertos and building an altar. So that's going to be wonderful. In addition to building an altar on campus, I have asked everyone in our community, and you can see this on our Rio Hondo Arts website. If you go to the cultural events calendar, I have called for photos. So if you have a photo of a loved one who has passed, and you want, whether it's this year or any year, please, you can find my email if you go to the cultural events calendar at Rio Hondo Arts, and you can send me a file, and we will print it and add it to the ofrenda so that your loved one will be remembered for Dia de los Muertos. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really important. So those are the events that are coming up. The altar is October 6th through 8th, and the art talk is on the 8th at 7:30 p.m. And the photos, I'd like to have those by September 30th, so there's enough time to print them. So please visit our website, riohondo.edu/arts, and see the cultural events calendar. Thank you all for joining us. I'll see you next time.